Hello and welcome back, Squirrel Nation. Today we are going to review the January patch hero balance adjustments. This video is only going to cover the hero adjustments. If you're interested in the item adjustments or the map changes, please go to my video from the prior day, which I will link in the comments below. Before we dive in, please, anybody new to the channel, smash that subscribe button so you don't miss out on my future videos. And everybody listening, I'm always looking for feedback. I'm always looking for video ideas. Please let me know what type of content you want, like if you want me to go over heroes, if you want me to show you more builds, if you want me to go over strategies, etc., because that just helps me give the content to the community that the community wants. Anyways, with that said, let's dive in. So to start, I'm just going to go down the list of all the January changes. So Annette, ability 1. So when I look at an ability, I'm looking at three key things. I'm looking at the base damage, so 65 is going to 55, so that's a nerf. I'm looking at the level scaling, so from 9 stays at 9, so that's the same. And then I'm looking at the scaling. How these are different is when the level goes up, that means that the character is less item dependent, whereas if scaling goes up, it means the character is more item dependent. So overall, this is a slight nerf to the Gust Force, and the cooldown is actually, this is probably something that's more impactful, is it is getting nerfed by a second at all levels. So less damage and is going to be up less often, so that's definitely a nerf to Annette's first ability. Wing Cuffs, the passive effect, for those who don't know, is it's essentially survivability for Annette, so the fact that it is increasing by 15 seconds or 33% is definitely a nerf also. So overall, this is a nerf to Annette on her ability 1 and 2, and if I was going to put it on a scale of impactful, I think it's moderately impactful. It's a moderate nerf. It's nothing too severe. Ignis. Okay, so same thing. We're looking, so base damage nerf. Per level is also going to be nerfed, and the scaling is also going to be nerfed. So when something is nerfed on all three measurements, that is a pretty significant nerf. So what that is his HP recovery. So basically that tells us that Ignis's sustain in team fights is definitely is nerfed as of this patch. So then we look at his ability 1, base damage nerfed, level scaling stays the same, and AP scaling stays the same. So that's a more minor nerf. I mean, it is still pretty big. What about a little over 10%, probably about 12% nerf. So that will be impactful, but it's not huge. Stun time, that definitely matters because Ignis does dish out combos. I don't think a 0.25 second difference is going to affect Ignis landing his combos, so I don't think this is going to be a huge nerf to his ability 1. So overall, Ignis's nerf, I would say, is also moderate. It's a little bit bigger nerf than Annette's nerf, but I don't think it's going to cause him to be unplayable. Okay, moving on to Kahlii. Very simple change is just simply they're speeding up the travel time of the auto, or the passive, but really it's the auto attack. So the very minor buff, it's going to help her clear minion waves slightly faster, but this is a very minor nerf, or a very minor buff, sorry. So Natalya, this, okay, so ability 1, the range is increased, so 10 meters. So for those of you who do not know, 1 meter equals 100 units. So you'll see both measurements used. So just basically it's going from 900 units to 1,000 units. 1,000 units is very far. I don't know off the top of my head, but that, I would say that's probably the second furthest ability. Like the only things I can see outranging it are going to be Elsu's snipe, and then ultimates, Kahlii's ultimate outranges that, but I mean that's a very large distance, so that's going to help a lot. And same thing with her Nova. So I think this is a significant buff to Natalya, because Natalya's issue in solo queue environment is that she's very vulnerable to getting out of position, and she couldn't do amazing damage from range, so she was very team dependent. She needed people to peel, she needed her teammates to really follow up on what she is doing. This is going to let her kind of turn into more of like a Trixie type of just range poke damage, and her damage is much higher. So I think Natalya, this is really going to help her. So that is, I would say, a significant buff. Not to where she's going to be OP, but she'll definitely be more viable than she is now. Flash, so ability 3. So this is a buff because what it's saying is that essentially when Flash ultimates, his tornado is going to move quicker. He's going to be able to move the tornado quicker, which means he's going to be able to keep people in it longer, and he's going to be able to trigger the end damage more reliably. So that is definitely a buff. The magic damage is just definitely buffed. One, like we said, the scaling ratio went up and the base damage stayed the same. So late game, Flash's ult is going to hit harder, which is awesome, and the cooldown is also buffed, so it looks like they dropped it 10 seconds per level, so that is another good thing. So Flash, this is definitely a buff. I would say this is a moderate buff, but Flash was kind of where I would put Flash as borderline viable. He was viable in the right hands, but there's still other mages who were better. This will definitely push him over to where he is definitely a viable mage. I wouldn't feel bad about picking him, or if a teammate picked him. Something I will point out though is because of the item changes, Flash was already going to have issue because Flash's wave clear requires him to be melee distance essentially, and that allows a lot of the other mages to do major poke damage to him. So say like a Natalya or a Kahlii or anything like that, like they're going to be able to consistently poke Flash. So he's already going to have a hard time in lane, and then with that negative 10% if you farm under tower, I think that's going to hurt Flash. So the item changes, so the buff to his skills is going to help him, but some of the changes to the map mechanics I think will hurt him, so I think Flash will stay about where he is in the, like a tier list. Astrid. Astrid is, before I even dive into these are the most significant buffs. So if you notice, her base damage has gone up. Her per level went down slightly, and her scaling went up, okay? So the way I like to look at it when you have per level and base change is you have a 50 damage base difference, and then you have a 40 versus 10. So a negative 10 damage per level, right? So meaning it's going to take 5 levels for the old formula to outscale the new formula, and that's not taking into account the 10% difference in scaling, but that's more minor in the early game. So this is still definitely a buff. It's going to make Astrid more powerful early game, which definitely will matter with the other changes happening. The attack speed increased, significant buff, so it went from 20% to 30%, and then per level is 6% versus 4, so that's a 50% buff to this attack speed, so that's a huge buff to this skill. Okay, so very large buff. Ability 2, Fearless Charge. So attack speed, this is just kind of like, this is how the mechanic generally works for a hero. My interpretation of this is that the attack speed will affect the very next attack. So after using the ability, your very next attack it will trigger on, and that's just something you would expect from all heroes. So I think that's more just consistency across heroes. Ability 3. So this I think is a very interesting change, and I'm curious how the mechanic will work. So they're making it much easier to use because it's easier to determine what's going to happen. So if Astrid has less than 60% health, right, you're going to get the stun. If enemy has less than 60% health, you're going to get the large damage, right? And the reason I think this could be very interesting is because now it's possible to trigger both. So if Astrid is, let's say, 50% health, the enemies are 50% health, I believe when she uses her ultimate, it's actually going to stun them and do huge damage, which didn't used to be possible because you could only, the conditions for triggering the stun are opposite of the conditions for triggering the slay effect. So yeah, I think that's going to be a huge buff, and if the mechanic does indeed work the way that I'm thinking it works, then that is going to be a massive difference. Like, Astrid is going to really clean up in team fights. Hero. Okay, and so this is definitely good also, this is just helping her trigger her passive. Her passive is the shield, so when she drops below 80%, she gets a shield, and it has a 24-second cooldown. So now, when she is in a team fight, she is just basically going to be able to get that shield, that sustainability back up again sooner. I think this is a very good buff to her because of the changes to the tower and the fact that you're getting less gold if you're farming under tower. This is going to let Astrid trade very well early game, and she already got a lot of power from her ability 1 early game. So the reason I say that is because if she's trading out with the enemy and they're poking at her while she clears wave, then she is going to trigger this shield. But then when she finishes clearing the wave, it's going to reduce it such that she has her shield by the next time the wave comes up. So I think it's going to be really good because Astrid will drop down to 80, get the shield, finish clearing the wave, and then by the time the next wave comes, she'll just keep repeating that. So she shouldn't drop too far below 80% unless something unexpected happens. Ormarr, I don't know, you're supposed to say whatever. Ormarr is what I call him. Anyways, Gut Punch, huge buff, right? 100% increase, so from 20 to 40%. On him getting the stun is nerfed to 0.75 flat, where it used to scale up to 1 second. The damage mechanic is interesting because he has been played as a support, okay? And for a support, this is a very good thing because it's independent of item and or level, okay? And what I mean by that is if you have an enemy who is super fed and they have 10,000 health, right? It does the same percent damage to them, right? Because it does based on their health. Whereas if the enemy's super underfed, it still does the same percent health to them. So hopefully I'm explaining that well. It doesn't, like, this is a good style of thing for a support because a support is not going to have a lot of gold and a lot of items and high level. So anything where they're doing a percent of the enemy's health is really good for a support player because it doesn't make them item dependent. However, they're switching that to 3 to 7% of Ormarr's max health. So that is going to actually make it so that if Ormarr's played as a support, he's actually going to be doing less damage than he would be if he was playing, let's say, Darkslayer and he's farming and getting gear. So I think this is going to hurt him as a support. Another thing is the internal cooldown is raised by a significant amount, 50%, right? From 4 seconds to 2 seconds. So that's also going to hurt him. So actually, I think he's going to stun more, but he's losing the role that he's played in, which is support. I don't think he's going to be as effective as a support because of this, but he will be maybe more viable in the Darkslayer lane. But I also don't like the fact that they've boosted the internal cooldown so much. Okay, so ability 2, Fighting Spirit stacks. So this is just a wording thing. I don't think this is going to be a significant difference. Yeah, this part I'm not honestly sure with the way they worded this. I think the last one only got 1 stack per hit. I'm not sure if this means if I hit multiple heroes I'll get multiple stacks, but I don't think it does. So I think this is really just changing the wording, but the effect itself is not going to change that much. I may be wrong. If I am, somebody please comment. Let me know so that we can spread that information to everybody else. Cooldown, once again, is increased to the 6 seconds also, so that's definitely a nerf. So I would say ability 2 is being nerfed. Ability 3, so his ultimate, he's going to have recovery, which he didn't used to have at all. So that's a nice add-in, but then at the same time, they are making the cooldown much higher. So that is also a nerf. I don't see 2% max health for every hit being worth the cooldown, but I don't know. We'll see. So the way I interpret this, if Ormarr ults in the middle of, let's say, 5 enemies, he'll be getting 10%, right? Because he's getting 2% for each one he hits. So he will have a lot of sustain in a big team fight. Another thing is he can use his ability 1 now while he's ultimating, and for those, the ability 1 is essentially a dash, so it means that when he ults, it's going to be much easier for him to stay on top of enemies, so that is good too. But the fact that the cooldown is going up so much is, I don't know, I kind of feel like it's going to offset. He should still have it up for every team fight, but he may not. So anyways, overall, I think, yeah, Ormarr is definitely just more of a rework to me, and he might actually be not much weaker, but this is going to be a slight nerf, I think, and he's not going to be a viable support, I don't believe. So he's going to be competing against other Darkslayer laners, and I don't look at this kid and think that that's something that's going to do well, right? Because his ultimate, if he's only ultimating one person, he's DS lane, that's not going to be that great. If he would have been support roaming to team fights, this would probably be a lot more significant. So anyways, moving on to Zuka, flat out this huge nerf. So this is essentially what this is the percent damage bonus that he got from his passive. So it is being significantly nerfed by 50%. So 30 to 15, and then the scaling keeps on going. The nerf is, yeah, this is a big nerf, right? 15% damage is quite a bit of damage, especially for a hero like Zuka, who is very burst dependent. Okay, so moving on to ability 1. So once again, we go from 50. So what they're doing here is, it used to just be pure scaling, okay? So now the scaling is reduced, but the base damage and the per level has gone up. So when I look at this, what this tells me is that they want Zuka to be less item dependent and more level dependent. The way that I would look at this is that if you're going to do that, it's making Zuka actually a desirable jungler, because what lane is going to be always ahead in levels? Well, that's going to be the jungler. The jungler is going to standard be 2 to 3 levels ahead of the enemy team. So that is going to help Zuka a lot now with this new formula, right? So if you're 3 levels ahead, that's another 60 damage, so you're talking about an extra 120 damage, right? And then you go 50 scaling versus 25 scaling. So you just basically, and I'm gonna take the risk of doing mathematication in this video, is you would need at level 20, so you would do 20 times 20, so 460 damage, right, is the new based on the base and the per level. So 460 damage at, or sorry, not level 20, 15. There we go. So 360, okay, so 360, and the difference in scaling is 0.25, right? So you would need, what is that, 12, so 1440 damage, 1440 attack damage on Zuka for the old version to be better than the new version. So this is definitely a buff, because that is extremely high. So this, I would say, is a significant buff to his ability 1. Okay, ability 2. Same thing. So base damage is buffed. Per level, buffed. And scaling remains the same. So once again, they're making him scale better off level, which is going to be awesome for him if he is going towards the jungle. When the shield disappears or is destroyed. Oh, another thing. Okay, so they're adding sustain. Okay, so that's another really great thing for him, and this will help him in the jungle also. So actually, when I'm reading through Zuka's, he's getting buff, and I would consider this a pretty significant buff, but then it's offset by his passive, so let's call it moderate. But his buff is going to help him become a much better jungler, because he's going to have great sustain, right? Because he can roll, get his shield, and when it breaks, he's going to have recovery. So Zuka is going to have a lot better sustain in lane or in jungle, which is awesome. Skill 3, so his ultimate is, okay, once again, same formula, right? So he dropped down by the 25 scaling, but his base and his per level is super high. So let's do the math again. This would be what, 670? So yeah, I mean, this is absolutely a buff. The 670, so you would have to have like, what, around 2500 attack damage, which is not, I mean, that's not happening. So late game, this is absolutely a buff. Early game, this is absolutely a buff. It's just flat out buff. So between the fact that all 3 of his abilities got buffed, I think that's why they reduced his passive, because I think he would have been insanely OP if they didn't. I do think the buffs on his abilities are significant enough to outweigh the nerf to his passive. So I would say Zuka is going to be, I'll call it a moderate buff, but it would definitely, it's enough of a buff to boost him up a tier. So if he was A tier, I would put him S tier now. And I think he's going to be much more viable in the jungle, and I think he might actually thrive in the jungle because of the new mechanics behind his abilities. Okay, Arduin, growth and attack speed, minor thing. This is nothing I would say super significant. And passive ability, Bloodlust, that is a nice buff, but nothing to go crazy. I would say this is a slight, overall slight buff to Arduin. If he's A, the bottom of A, this might put him top A type of a thing. So it's not moving him a full tier, but it is moving him up. Roxie, Fire Spirit. Okay, so her scaling is going to be even better. So basically it used to be per 50 points of health, you get 1 ability power. Now it's 40, so that is a very nice buff to Roxie. Wildfire, the base is the same, the per level is the same, but the scaling has gone up a little bit. Right, just 0.02%, so I mean that's, well, 2%. So, I mean, minor buff. Blazing Shield, the haste, that's a nice buff. The duration of the slow is nice. For those of you, the mechanic is if Roxie uses her shield and she touches an enemy, then they will become slowed, so basically the slow is going to last longer. This is a very strong buff, because if the enemy is slowed for 2 seconds, that means that Roxie is going to be able to keep him in her fire longer, right? And the fire is also getting buffed, and her AP is going to be higher because of the passive buff, so good buff. This is very nice. And also the cooldown is reduced, so that's really good, because if you used to think about it, it was 1.5 seconds slow versus a 10-second cooldown, right? So there's 8.5 seconds that the enemy is not slowed. Whereas now, it's 2 seconds to 8, so there's only 6 seconds in which the enemy's not going to be slowed. So it's going to be a lot easier for Roxie to stick to enemy heroes. Ultimate, the cooldown is reduced, and late game down to 27 seconds is awesome. It's going to basically be up every single team fight. Overall, this is I would say this is a significant buff to Roxie. Yeah, this is just a really good buff to Roxie overall. I think she will definitely be back to where she was before her last nerf. So moving on to Richter. Okay, health is buffed, right? So he just has a little more health. That's buffed. Base damage, nerf. Level scaling buff, and AP scaling buff. Okay, so this is more of a rebalance. And if we look at this, there's a 5 damage per level difference. So meaning at level 2, the 50 will have become 60, so they'll be about equivalent. So level 2 and beyond, the new version is more damage, so it's a buff. So to me, when you see things like this, it's meaning they want to change his power curve. So they're making him a little weaker early game, but they're going to make him stronger late game. And then if we look at the slash damage, so the nerf to the base, nerf to the per level, or no, sorry, buff to the per level, and buff to the scaling, right? So same dynamic as happened on above. So once again, they're moving the power curve, right? So Richter is gonna be weaker early game, but stronger late game. His knock-up only lasts 0.75 seconds. I don't think that's I mean, it matters in like team fight situations, but early game laning type of thing, the stun is still significant enough that I don't think it's going to mess up anything too heavily. So portion of damage based on target. Okay, so they're changing it from a flat 10%. So level 1 of the skill, it was 10%, to now level 1 would be 5%. And each time you put points into the skill, it will scale all the way up to 10%. So this is a nerf. Cooldown from 9, and now it can get lower and lower, so that's a buff. These two things between the cooldown and between The difference, neutral. Maybe a slow, that's hard to say. I'd say it's pretty neutral. I'd have to really crunch the numbers to figure that out. So that's pretty neutral. Ability tool, this is a major nerf, I would say, because Richter, the whole point about him is he dives in, does his burst damage, he uses retaliate, gets out, rinse and repeat, right? So by increasing the cooldown, it means that he's not going to be able to dive in as often, okay? I think that this is a nerf, and this may really hit him more so. So, to me, what these changes say that the devs are trying to do is they're moving his late game power up, but they're going to make it so that he can't dive in on people as often. So Richter's going to hit harder, but he's not going to be able to dive into fights as much. And the HP scaling, I don't think is enough of a change that it's going to let him survive the dive-in. So he's already squishy when he dives in, and he doesn't have retaliate, and I don't think his new health is enough to make up for the nerf to his retaliation cooldown. So overall, I would say this is a nerf to Richter. Slight nerf to Richter. Slight. Okay. Emily, so her ability 3 is just a buff, right? So, but it's a mid and late game buff since the first iteration isn't touched, and same thing, buff to that per second. Yeah, so they're just giving her a little more power mid and late game, which is good because Emily is already very strong early game. She's one of the stronger heroes early game and 1v1, but her problem is she does fall off, so it looks like they're trying to compensate for her fall off a little bit. But if you notice, this is just base damage. There's no scaling to it still, so it's really not going to help her super that much late game. I would say mid game is where it would be more significant, but this is a minor. It's a buff, but it's a very minor buff in my eyes. So Terra cooldown reduced. This, I would say this is a minor buff. It's not super significant. Arthur, minor buff, right? His armor's going up. This, I would say, is kind of like that Astrid change on ability 2. It's just more of keeping, kind of tidying up, I guess. Scud. Okay, so this one's interesting. So the scaling stays the same. The base damage is changing. If you notice, early, it is getting nerfed, but late, it is getting buffed. So basically, same thing has happened to Richter, is they're making Scud less powerful early, but they're giving him more power late game. And then same thing with the cooldown, right? It's nerfed early game, because the cooldown is going to be a second higher, 7 versus 6 seconds, but late game it's going to be lower, so 6 seconds versus 5.5 seconds. So this is just a power shift. Yeah. If I consider the items and such coming, I think this will be a nerf to Scud, and it's going to hurt him because it's going to be easier to bully him in the beginning of games, and if you get a lead over him, he's going to be in a rough spot. So Scud is very much dependent on his burst, so he uses his charge and then I forget what his S2 is called, but his burst damage. So not being able to charge in as often and doing as much damage from it is going to hurt him. I'm not sure if this is enough that he won't be able to clear the waves like he used to. So I don't think it is, though, so this may actually end up being not that significant of a nerf to him. I'd have to play around with it to see. But I'd say this is basically a very slight nerf. Very slight nerf. Yebnith, well, yeah, so they still don't like his sustain. So the issue with Yebnith is, and why his sustain has been consistently getting nerfed, is he is a hero that you can kind of consider unkillable. Like, you're not going to kill him 1v1. People almost ignore his lane because he's just so hard to do anything with. So that's why they've been nerfing his sustain. His sustain is when he goes in the brush, he gets that regen. So they're just reducing that again, and I think this is 2, maybe even 3 patches in a row that they have reduced his regen. So definitely a nerf. The damage, if we look, is base damage down, per level up, and scaling the same. So this is just, once again, shifting power from, he's going to be a little weaker early game and then stronger late game. So at level 15, so level 3, he'll be even, so level 4 on, he will be stronger with the new formula. So yes. Ari, this is actually a good amount of regen. Yeah, that moderate nerf, or moderate buff, sorry. It's nothing like, I don't think it's super significant, but it is a nice, it's going to help her stay in lane more and poke at people, so that's good. Marja, minor nerf. It's kind of like Ari buff, then this is kind of the same level of nerf to Marja. She is one of my favorite heroes, and I don't think this is going to really affect anything, to be honest, because she has so much regen from other things like her lifesteal and such that I don't think this really matters, except very, very early game. And same thing with armor, yeah, I don't think it's significant. Lubu, so he's getting more range on his ability 1, so S1 third stage of it, minor buff. I don't see this being super significant either. I'm not sure if maybe this lets him get over certain terrain that he wasn't able to get over before. If it is, then maybe a little bit bigger buff than I'm thinking, but anyways. Teemee is very interesting. This is a very strong buff. His ability 1 is the thing, the circle around him that speeds up his movement speed and lets him stun all enemies in that circle. The reason I say this is a huge buff is it has a 5-second cooldown on ability 1s, but if you hit an enemy hero and goes down by 40 seconds, right? So, or sorry, 40%, so that would be 2 seconds. So it'll only be a 3-second cooldown, and I mean, that's essentially, he can just keep chain S1ing. So that's going to be a lot of stun, a lot more CC. I think this could put Teemee back into the meta and back into a top tier support, actually. Another thing I think is going to really help Teemee is the new support items. I think Teemee with the Tide, what is it, Tide Maker, I think, could be really awesome, right? Because his passive already provides extra gold to the team, and then if you Tide Caller is what it's called. But anyways, the item that also provides more gold to you and your teammate. Between his passive and that item, Teemee could be providing major gold leads to his team, and then now he can just basically constantly be annoying the enemy by just stunning. Yeah, I think this is an awesome change to Teemee. I look forward to playing him after the patch and testing that out. Quillen is getting nerfed. Let's see how big. Base damage nerfed. Per level same. Scaling nerfed. Okay, so they're going to make him weaker early game, and they're going to make him weaker late game is the way I interpret this. Assassinate, base damage nerf, per level nerf, and scaling nerf. So this is significant nerf. This will definitely... Quillen will still be viable, but he won't be what he is now, this snowball monster, and I think that's what they're trying to eliminate. Is Quillen now is at a stage where if he gets kills early and starts snowballing, he just, you can't play against him, right? Like, he shows up and you're dead, and there's really no outplay potential, there's nothing, it's just he shows up, you're dead, bam. This should make his scaling it harder for him to become that monster because he scales much less. And then early game, it's going to make it harder for him to get the kills to start snowballing. So I think this is going to... It's not going to drop him off the map, but it is a nice step in the right direction. I wouldn't be surprised if this was kind of a test buff, and then next patch we could probably expect another minor buff, depending on where these changes do leave him. But it's definitely a nerf, sorry, a nerf. And anyways, so that is it. That is all the hero changes, my thoughts on it. If you like today's video, please like and subscribe if you have not already. And again, in the comments, please just leave me any feedback. You know, feedback can be anything about the content, about the way that I present information, about even the background music. You know, I love it all. I try to listen to you guys as much as I can, and I'm always trying to engage with you guys in the comment. So yeah, please don't be shy and just speak up if you have any ideas for me. Anyways, as always, I hope you have an outstanding day and happy ranking. Take care.